we're happy with the growth we're having now. It's a growth that's meaningful for us, and yet we can control the quality of the outcomes. If we triple the growth rate, Austin, we couldn't have this quality of outcome.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Commercial Real Estate Secrets, where I'm your host, Austin Hare. And our guest is Mark Ziller. He is the co-founder and CEO of Innovative Petcare. They started in January of 2015, and they've already grown to 60 locations, which is some very impressive growth. So, Mark, thanks for coming on the show today. How's it going?
It's going great. It's a pleasure to be here today, Austin.
Yeah. So, I think you're in an awesome space. The vet space is just exploding, and you guys have a lot of opportunity in front of you. But I'm curious, how did you go about getting involved in that? It seems like people, in the vet consolidator space, you either were it was a combination of being very into animals and being very entrepreneurial. And so were those two themes kind of playing themselves out at an early age?
Yeah, so I spent most of my career in the veterinary space. During the early 90s, started a veterinary distribution business and grew that to be a successful business. Spent 20 years in that and learned to love the industry and the people, saw the opportunity. Eventually, that space was consolidating rapidly and decided to sell the business to a larger strategic and stayed on with them for a period of time. One of my good friends and longtime senior managers and I missed more of the entrepreneurial side of the business. That business had grown to $1 billion business, and we missed being able to more directly control the culture, missed the entrepreneurial speed, and more of the family-run business type aspect and feel to it than the big company feel. And so we wanted to stay in the industry. We saw an opportunity in acquiring and operating veterinary practices. So stayed in the same industry, but a different point in the value chain. And it is a great industry. We're fortunate to be here.
Okay. And so I think, from the outside looking in, you're CEO of a very successful company. It's easy to just say, oh, well, he's lucky. I could never be like that. And they kind of write it off, or maybe some people these days are getting jealous. Do you think that the average person, and even below average person, has the ability to be successful? Like, what do you think it was that, I kind of like going early on in childhood, right? Like, was there anything that was entrepreneurial about you in school? Was there anything like that was competitive about you that you were trying to, strive to be the best at something, even from an early age?
Yeah, if you went back to my early childhood friends and yearbooks, I don't think anything would have said Mark's likely to be a leader and a CEO. I was very much shy and introverted. I was not particularly entrepreneurial as a young man. I did start my first business in my early 20s, but it was as much luck as anything. Certainly wasn't preordained.
What was that business?
It was TW Medical Veterinary Supply. It was a distribution business that supplied veterinary clinics. So started it when I was 23 or 24.
Wow.
So just young enough to be ignorant and overlook all the future hardships.
Yeah.
It's a great question, Austin. I think anyone can be an entrepreneur, and it takes hard work and some sacrifice, and you have to be willing to ignore some naysayers. But I think anyone can do it, and don't overlook the hard work aspect. It's not just those with great skill. Look, I think all of us would say hard work and sacrifice and luck played as much of a role as anything else.
Yeah. So you said, looking at your high school yearbook, you wouldn't have pegged you to be a successful CEO, but you started your first company when you were 23. So did anything change? I mean, that's obviously the age where you go to college. Did college change your mindset? Did you start reading self-development books? Did you have a hunger for that was awakened within you? I mean, anything like that?
Certainly I've always been sort of insatiably curious, consumer of information. I changed majors 5 or 6 times in college. It wasn't that I didn't like what I was in. I couldn't make up my mind. There was that aspect. And being an entrepreneur feeds into that. Well, you're always learning new things. It's broad. You can go both deep and broad and alternate back and forth between it. I think like many entrepreneurs, I kind of stumbled into the opportunity at the time, and then it fit, and I enjoyed it. Don't know that I was particularly good at it early on. Look, it's a steep learning curve, and I don't have a huge ego tied to things, so I was always willing to learn and surround myself by smart people and others and try to find ways to learn. Yeah, I've read a ton of business books and other things to try to learn. I want good outcomes, and I don't care where the idea comes from, so I will shamelessly take any idea or advice and try to incorporate them to get better results.
What was the first like business book or self-development book that you read that like really made a difference in your life? Do you consider those two same things or different things, by the way, like a business book and a self-development book?
Related, but probably different. You
Okay.
know, I don't know. I have read hundreds over the years. I'll tell you what was really influential for me early on, though, is it's fairly early in my career. I joined a CEO peer group. It was called the Executive Committee, or TEC at the time, and now it's called Vistage. And it's a group where they'll put 10 to 15 CEOs together, and you'll get together for roundtables, share ideas, and help work problems for each other, hear speakers. Uh, Made some lifelong friends in that. Learned a ton by surrounding myself with other smart, successful people, and shamelessly wanting to learn and do as well as they did.
Mm.
Very influential in my career, and I certainly encourage people to find peer-based learning opportunities like that. Something we're trying to incorporate into innovative pet care today, so our veterinarians and our practice leaders have a chance to learn from each other.
I think it's so smart. Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned Vistage because it did the exact same course. It was, of course, it was in Orlando. But yeah, I was a member of Vistage for over a year back when I had several fitness centers around the Central Florida area. And it was awesome. I mean, just learning from the peers. And, they kind of structure you by a group based on like your revenue size of your organization. And so you're kind of with people that are similar, but some people are ahead, some people are behind. And it was great learning from the people that are ahead. Do you think, were they doing that at the time, or do you think it was one of those things like you're just trying to surround yourself by people that are smarter than you at the time?
Yeah, at the time they were still doing the same thing where they had different kind of revenue ranges. In fact, at one point in my career, I kind of moved from the small group size to the big group size. But it was a great opportunity because they did have a mix of businesses that were smaller that could learn from you, and people that were further along in their career and business development and had bigger teams. And it was great to see how those unfolded and learn from some people that had been there and done that.
Yeah. Yeah. Tony Robbins likes to talk about fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And so earlier you said, you don't have an ego in decisions, you can drop it and you want to learn from other people. And that's definitely what you consider a growth mindset. Like a fixed mindset would be kind of like, this is the way things are. Oh, people don't ever do this. Nobody's ever going to do that. We're never going to, it's always like everything is infinite. It's like, yeah, we always do this. We never do that. Where the growth mindset is always like, let's consider that maybe. And it sounds like having a growth mindset has been really important for you and your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think, what used to drive me crazy is companies get big and then people say, well, that's not the way we do things. Or that's not what the policy says. Uh, that just drives me crazy. I want a good solution, and I don't have all the ideas. Things change all the time. I hope we're learning. And so the way we used to do it, it may have been the best way, shouldn't still be the best way. So I'm always looking for a way to improve and learn from past experiences.
Okay. And so you said you had this veterinary supply company for 15 years, about from 1990 until 2015.
Yep.
Okay.
I sold it probably around 2000, but stayed
Okay.
on and ran a large division for a larger company. Good experience.
All right. I gotcha. And so when you decided to get into the vet consolidation space, did you start with an acquisition?
We did. We started with an initial acquisition. We spent a lot of time kind of coming up with a business plan and deciding how we wanted to do it and how we were going to fund it. We were going to do personal contributions and friends and family, or go out and get institutional funds. Ultimately decided to get private equity backing because we wanted the ability to grow at a pace we wanted, and not only acquire practices, but invest in them beyond the acquisition, so that we were really focused on post-acquisition performance. And so we did find a good private equity partner to start with. And
that's insane that you guys were able to do that at the first location, because a lot of times they want to see a track record of, that you can do acquisitions, that you can manage multiple locations. So, yeah, I'm surprised to hear that.
Yeah, look, it wasn't easy. Took some work, but we did find a really good private equity partner that took a leap of faith on us and bet on us as a management team with industry experience. Great group, and very appreciative to the fact that they did help us get started. And we ultimately, over time, kind of outgrew their comfort level, which is totally normal and kind of the natural evolution, moved to a larger firm. But you're right. We talk about entrepreneurism. I think there's always that fine line between not listening to the naysayers and it can't be done, you'll never get it done. And on the other side, are you just ignoring good advice and cautions maybe you should be paying attention to? And there's a fine line there. No, it wasn't easy and it took work, but it was possible and we got it done.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting because it seems like most of the people that I talk to in this consolidation space, the mergers and acquisition space, really try and procrastinate private equity as long as they can. Because when you look at it, if you take on, you can either bootstrap it, right, using your own money, or you can take on bank debt, which a lot of people do. They're taking you're paying a fixed percentage of the debt that you take on. When you take on private equity, you're giving them a piece of the upside. So a lot of people are reluctant to do that. Obviously, you weren't. When you were like, how did you decide on private equity over bank debt?
Bank debt is always challenging. It's great because you maintain the ownership, and certainly that can be appealing. But we looked and said, there's a lot that a good private equity partner can bring to the table beyond just a checkbook. They can help with strategic guidance and banking relationships and access to other capital. And are we willing to see a bigger picture and maybe a bigger pie down the road, but give up some control? We were very selective on who we picked and found someone we were comfortable with that was really well aligned with what we were doing. We weren't trying to find an industry expert that came in and said, here's how you do everything and here's our team. We wanted someone that was used to backing entrepreneurs. But we did that. And so, we decided there was a big enough opportunity and we could execute on it well enough that we would get value from having access to the capital. And so you can tap into more capital on private equity than you typically can on the debt side. And we thought that was a good trade-off.
Okay. And I'm sure you're still leveraging bank debt as well, right? When you're acquiring properties, acquiring locations.
We do.
Yeah. So,
and it's amazingly a lot easier when you have a private equity partner than when you're just an entrepreneur on your own.
That's a good point. So, is there any quick maybe lessons or bullet points that you could pull out of your experience with private equity if anybody's looking to take on private equity who's listening to this?
Well, I think it's really important to find someone that's aligned with you. Don't just think of private equity as a big checkbook in the sky. The cultural fit, the strategy, the approach, who they're used to working with, all those things matter a lot. It's like a partnership. And so you're going to spend a lot of time with it. You want to get along with the people. You want to be aligned on the type of fund they are. So spend the time understanding how private equity works and how the people you may be partnering with work to make sure it's in good alignment. They can bring a lot to the table and it can be a great relationship. But if you pick someone that's fundamentally looking for a different outcome or has a different approach, it can also be disaster.
Okay, that's great advice. So how much did you know about running a veterinary clinic? And your locations are about what, 3 to 20,000 square feet? Like what kind of footprint are you guys taking?
Yeah, a typical vet practice is probably 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 square feet. I think our largest centers are in the 20,000 square foot range. We probably have probably about 2,500. So yeah.
Okay. So
my co-founder in the business, Paul Coville, has worked in practice and was a practice technician, a practice manager, and had more in clinic experience. And then both of us have spent years getting to know veterinary practices and veterinarians through selling to them and having relationships with thousands of them around the country. So we understood it fairly well. Certainly understood the space and the dynamics. We saw the trials and tribulations and where we thought we could help them. These are small businesses without a lot of resources that larger companies get. So part of our model was, how can we acquire good practices and then invest in them and give them support resources that they might not otherwise have?
Yeah, I think that's really great. Especially because when you go to school and you become any sort of doctor or healthcare or medical provider, you're getting a lot of stuff, clinically, right? But you're getting very little business wise. And so a lot of times it's just thrown on you like, okay, go to school, graduate, get your medical degree. And then, oh, by the way, you got to learn how to hire staff and do payroll and do HR and marketing and wear all these different hats. And half the time they don't even want to do that.
Yeah, look, I think this is true in any professional industry, whether it's doctors, lawyers, engineers. You have a very bright well-educated group, but they've studied a specialized discipline. And business and management is a completely separate discipline that they haven't studied for. Some of them are great at it just naturally, but most of them haven't studied, and the demands on their time are tough. These are small businesses without big teams. So there's what Paul and I felt is that there are ways to bring some of the big company resources and capabilities without having to have the big company culture. We don't even like the word corporate. We run this in a very decentralized approach. We don't try to standardize everything across our practices. Our view is that we want to come in and keep what's working for you, but provide tools and resources and training that they otherwise might not have been able to have. Take some of the low value things off their plate to free them on the more important medical outcomes and servicing pet owners.
Did you guys have to do anything with the real estate in the first one? Like, was the owner trying to sell it, or did you just simply take over the lease?
So it's interesting. When we were building our business plan, we assumed that a pretty good percentage of practices would want to sell the real estate with the practice. That turned out not to be the most common scenario. So most of the time we found that these were small business owners. They liked the real estate. They saw it as a good investment to hang on to personally, and so they would sell the practice and hang on to the real estate. Over time, that changed, and we would run into cases where someone would want to sell it. We were always prepared to do that if we needed to, but that's not how we chose to deploy capital in a perfect world. So where possible, we would work with a sale leaseback company.
Okay. And so during that very first one, you didn't buy that real estate. That issue came later. Okay.
Correct.
And yeah, I think it's smart. I mean, we like doing that too. Like we like being the guys who are doing the sale leasebacks. And so I'm sure there are plenty of companies organizations you can talk to about essentially, and again, it's probably the same thing, right? Finding that right fit. Like, who are you going to find to do a sale leaseback? Because you can structure that a lot of different ways. You know what I mean? Depending on who you're working with. If you can give them a lot of, like, as a landlord or as a investor, you can give a lot of TI, but that's going to mean higher rent, right? Or do you want to just work on getting the rent low as possible? And a lot of times those things are determined by what's your timeline, before your next exit. But there's a lot of things you can do with what we call, spreadsheet math.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And finding someone that's not only an expert in that particular area of the sale leaseback, but understands your industry and what makes a good practice, how secure the financials are, has been good. Also, as a group, we're able to provide a bigger guarantee and more financial security to those people and get a little bit better rate than an individual single owner may be able to get.
Yeah. So, okay, it seems like the first acquisition, going from like 1 to 2 or 3, a lot of times and is like that hardest transition. Like, when you have, because you can kind of focus on everything in that one physical location and it's all centralized and you can physically be there, but you get to a certain point where like scaling becomes really hard. So like, what were some lessons that you learned when you were scaling? Like, how hard was it to do acquisitions? Did you have any acquisitions that went bad early on?
No, look, we've been fortunate. We've been very selective. We look at a lot, and we're actually pretty choosy about it. So we've had great growth. We'll finish the year around 60 practices. We could literally be at 2 or 3 times the size if that's how we define success and the goal. It's not how we choose to do that. We're more focused on having quality assets that are growing well than just sheer numbers and aggregating them. Look, it's a classic case of scaling, and fortunately, Paul and I have been able to build a really good team, and it's also the part of the business that I probably enjoy more than anything is the building of the team and scaling it and kind of watching it grow over time. So I've been fortunate in that. Haven't had any acquisitions go bad, but it takes thought. You need to be one step ahead, but you can't afford to usually be 2 or 3 steps ahead. So you need to hire good people and make sure you keep the culture intact as you grow.
So did you guys, when you acquired the first one, did you change anything and like trying to hammer down like your specific niche?
Well, I think early on, our niche was really our approach, that we came in and focused on culture. We didn't come in and change their name and change their computer systems and change all the way they operated, which is kind of a typical roll-up strategy. We were there to say, look, we've invested in a good business. You're a good team. Let's find where your challenges are and bring you new resources and marketing and benefits and other things you may not have. So our approach itself is somewhat of our differentiator.
Okay. Um, and so how many employees did you have with the vet supply company? You guys.
Oh, Austin, that's a great question. I think my group had about 120 employees. It was in a
Wow.
company. It ended up being part of a company with a little over 1,000.
Okay. So that's where you really sharpened your teeth in terms of maybe hiring people or at least learning how to like train and lead people, right?
Yeah, look, it's always an adventure.
So like when you started growing and expanding, the not every hire goes right, obviously. Like, how would you describe your process for like trying to find the right people? Like, was there anything as you were trying to bring on people and onboard people and grow, like, did you do anything wrong that's easy to point in hindsight, that's easy to point out that in turn led to a massive kind of breakthrough that you could scale faster?
Look, when you find the right people, really good people, and they get it culturally, you can trust them and decentralize. You have people that make decisions, and you get this force multiplier effect. It doesn't have to be me doing everything. Clearly, have made hiring mistakes. Have made plenty of them. No one's perfect. Um, in terms of the lessons learned, um, companies are built on those rock stars you're able to hire, and so you find the good people and invest in them, and you want them to be successful and happy. But you're going to make mistakes. Um, I don't think I've ever looked back at someone I had to let go and say, boy, that was a terrible decision. But routinely, you look back and say, why did I wait so long? I knew this earlier on.
You just feel bad. I mean, it's human nature. You feel bad
It's
firing.
human nature, but you will know. And when you have someone that's not the right fit, you're not voting on their worth as a human being. You're saying they are the wrong person for this role for some reason, and
Yeah.
you need to make a change. You're doing a disservice to everyone else in the organization if you don't do that and do it so, when I look at lessons, look, when a mistake happens one way or the other, it's best for that employee and everyone else on the team to make a decision and make a change quickly.
Yeah, so because I know hiring is such a hot topic right now, and you've got a lot of stimulus money floating around out there, and you had a lot of government incentives up until like a month or two ago, and then there's inflation, and then there's also a change in the workforce of people seeing Bitcoin and TikTok millionaires, right? Everybody wants to like get rich quick, more so than ever. It's always been a thing, but more so recently, it seems like it's a real possibility, at least in their minds, and so. I think the question is like, how do you hire those good people? Like, how do you I know that I believe it was Netflix that put their core tenants up online, and they said like, hey, these are our values. Like, if you want to work here, like, look at our values, look at our core tenants first. If they match with you, great. If they don't, don't even bother. So I'm curious, like, is there anything specifically that you've learned that you feel like has really helped you attract the right people and repel the wrong people from the very beginning?
Yeah, I think more than anything else, Austin, it's the culture piece. I don't think you can sustainably say, I'm going to get the best people, but I'm just going to always pay more and throw money at a problem. You need to be competitive. You need to pay people well and treat them well. But I think the culture piece is what will set you apart. If people see the vision and the culture and they say, that's the type of company I want to work for or stay at, then you're really winning. And so many companies just either don't understand culture or don't give it any focus. Look, it's the lifeblood. Culture will develop. Everyone has a culture. If you don't choose to develop it, it's going to be whatever grows on its own. And you don't want a weed. You want to have a rose. So define the culture and then be out there with it. Show off the great people. Show off the good things you're doing. I think lots of companies do good things. You want to be out there showing what your team's doing and who it's made up of. Your own good employees and the things they're doing should be your sales pitch. Come join and be part of this. And I think that's what we're trying to do. I'm super proud of the team we've got. It's the best I've ever worked with. And that's really the sales pitch. We're in a tough labor market. All the things you described, and then to compound it, we're in an industry with a critical shortage of veterinarians and technicians. And I can't solve some of those problems. I can't go create more licensed veterinarians. So we've got to win a disproportionate share of those battles and keep the ones we've got. So culture becomes a really big part of that.
Yeah, I think it's really true. And it's like you hear it over and over again, but it can kind of sound like, you know, you don't have anything. Sometimes when you hear things like, oh, culture, 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 you feel like you don't have anything left to learn, right? But I like how you mentioned, you got to define your culture. And if you haven't defined it, then it's going to grow into something else. How do you guys define your culture at Innovative Pet Care?
It's a great question. When Paul and I decided to start this business, we literally wrote three things on a napkin at dinner one night. And it was culture first, have fun, and make money. Everyone wants to make money. And it's important to have money to be able to continue to invest in the things you want. We felt a lot of businesses just didn't care less if you had fun, but it should be part of why we're doing this. And then at the top of the list, we had culture. And it was a big part of our life and who we hired, and it's part of our decision-making process. When we have to make decisions, we'll say, look, does this lead us down a path to who we want to be or not? And so it was part of our DNA from the beginning. But what really became a challenge for us is during a period of high growth, COVID struck. And we couldn't be around each other. We literally were having to self-isolate. And so it became hard to distill the culture for new hires. And a number of employees helped lead the effort for us to define the culture, where before it was person-to-person interaction, an example, and having one-on-one conversations. In the midst of COVID, where we're growing, we couldn't do some of that. And so we went through an effort to literally articulate the culture and document it. And it's been a great process. And what I'm excited about is really the employees encapsulated what they'd learned from Paul and I, and it matched up with what we were trying to do, and they put it in their words, and it's been a great process.
Okay.
But, at the end of the day, I think what's really important is culture is not a slogan that's written on a wall. Culture is the sum of all your interactions. It's how you really live. It's all the little things. So the actions have to follow the words. And you can have any words you want. If you're not living it, it's totally meaningless. And that's what we really focus on.
Or it's negative, right? Like if you have core tenets and a culture slogan that's written, but you don't do it or do the opposite, I mean, it's worse than not having anything.
I think you're right. If you can't be believed on that, then what can you believe? What's the reason to be there?
Yeah. So that's cool. So, having a right culture that's transparent, that you try and not only verbalize, but you try and live it. It sounds like is what's really helped you guys attract the right people. That's laid the groundwork for growing and scaling an organization.
Yep, completely agree.
So,
almost no time spent on culture and values is poorly spent. It's probably the biggest thing I do as CEO, really, or the most impactful. It shapes everything else.
Yeah, and so to get tactical, I mean, does that include like retreats? I mean, some people in Silicon Valley define culture as like putting up ping pong tables and kombucha dispensers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, look, I think it can be anything, but it has to match with what you're trying to do. I think for us, it's about people and relationships and things of that nature. It's not about frills and the trappings.
Okay. And so when a lot of times, like we'll have these goals, especially in real estate, like we have goals to acquire like a certain amount of properties. And the thing is, if you have a goal of say getting to 100 properties, you can't just do 10 per year because it takes a long time to build that pipeline and build that momentum. A lot of times the first year you might just do 1 or 0, but then the next year, now you're doing 2, and then that kind of doubles, then you can do 4. And so it kind of builds on itself like that. Is that kind of the same process that you've been seeing in your organization?
It is. Very much there is a pipeline, and these are big decisions for someone to sell or partner with us in their business. We all know how as an entrepreneur, a lot of your identity is tied to that business, and the team is like an extended family. So it can be a slow process, and there's certainly a pipeline aspect to it. Through hard work and investing time in it, Paul and the BD team have gotten us to where we can grow at this pace. In fact, we could grow faster. We're happy with the growth we're having now. It's a growth that's meaningful for us, and yet we can control the quality of the outcomes. If we tripled the growth rate, Austin, we couldn't have this quality of outcome. And the onboarding process and how people feel through it's really key to us. So we certainly want to grow, and we'll keep growing. We've actually never had a business plan where we circled some number on a board and said, if we could only be 500 practices. That's not how we define success. I used to tell the team I'd rather have, 10 practices growing 20% a year than 200 practices growing 5% a year. It's how well our team's doing more than anything.
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, along those lines, how do you encapsulate your kind of 10-year vision for the company? What's success look like to you guys?
Yeah, so to us, it's about we want to invest in great practices and make sure we're providing them the runway so they can continue to be successful for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So we want our practices to be outperforming the industry, have the best teams, have low turnover, have great client experiences and client reviews. If that's happening, we're going to make money and be financially successful. So to us, it's how well our teams or practices are doing and how well we're supporting them. I think if you run a really good business, you're going to have tons of options down the road, and we don't need to have a particular outcome in mind. Run a great business, and the rest takes care of itself.
Okay. Do you feel like there was any place along the journey of the last 6 years where you hit like a ceiling, and then you broke through, and then you hit a ceiling and it broke through? Can you kind of like categorize it into steps like that?
Yeah, I think the stair step type experience is common in any business. You get to a point and you struggle, and then you have the teams and systems and knowledge to be able to do more, and you see it all the time. Part of our job is to stay a step ahead and be thinking about the future growth so we don't stumble or have quality drop. I will say that one of the big turning points for us is we started the business with a great private equity partner that really did take a leap of faith and help us grow and turn this into a business. But at some point, the market became more expensive, and we'd grown to a point where we were out of their comfort zone, and we moved to a larger private equity firm. But that really was a game changer for us. It enabled us to invest in our team more and build the platform out and accelerate that growth. And so that happened in late 2018, and we've since grown the business pretty explosively. Could do more, but we're focused on that responsible growth. But it was certainly a big turning point for us.
Yeah. At what stage do you feel like you had to get like a district manager? Like, how was that by a certain number of operation or a certain number of locations, or like how did you kind of navigate through that?
Yeah. So look, the first year we had minimal staff. But after that, we hired a really experienced CFO that's become part of our senior leadership team and helped build out a great finance team. And we began to invest in different functions of the business to bring in the marketing and recruiting and operational support to do things. And look, typical entrepreneur, I had a lot on my shoulders early on, as did my partner. But we always had a vision of hiring great people, and we've been able to do that. And look, it's in large part thanks to having a forward-looking and supportive private equity partner that lets us lay out a vision and say, here's where we want to go, and we need the capital to invest in that and hire these people. So it's not been one point in time. It's been continual. But certainly the last couple of years, we've had pretty dramatic growth and have built the team out a lot. Our innovative corporate team has grown over 40% so far this year.
Wow.
We've continued to have good growth, and we're adding practices through acquisition, but our existing practices are growing very strongly organically.
Yeah, and so I think we talked earlier. Moving forward, you have a little bit of a split prong approach between mostly acquisitions, but also doing some de novos as well.
We have done de novos and plan to do more. I like de novos. Some of it's the entrepreneur in me liking starting things. I think in a time when valuations are very high in the industry, it's a good value creation idea, and you get to pick everything: the location, the layout, the team. It's different to finance them. It's more hands-on and management intensive to launch them. But ultimately, I think it's going to continue to be a part of our strategy. It's not a pivot to a new strategy. It's just a supplement to it, and I'd like to get where we can do a couple a year.
Yeah, and I think that's smart. A lot of groups, they start out with the acquisition model. Like you start out with one, right? You kind of hammer down on your processes and your procedures or your niche or whatever. And then you can kind of grow through acquisition with places that fit that. But at some point, like if you want to maintain your rate of growth or your rate of progress, like there's only so many that fit that. And you're going to have to do de novo if you want to keep growing. Not only that, but like you said earlier, like the cost of these acquisitions now just getting so high, like you're paying such a high multiple on the earnings. And that's just happening in M&A, across the board, like anything healthcare related, that it really makes you question like, okay, like we're paying whatever 3, 4, 5, 6 times earnings, right? Like, and de novo takes maybe a year, maybe 2 years, somewhere in between there to get break even. It's like at some point, like you kind of you're bound. Even though I know you can do an acquisition, you can do some value add, you can get the revenue up right away, and it is easier to get financing like you mentioned. But at some point, there's that threshold. Like, yeah, this de novo kind of makes more sense. How are you guys balancing that?
Yeah, you're right. And look, there are always constraints, and it's a matter of understanding what the constraints are and how you balance it. With de novos, your constraints are finding that foundational team that you can hinge your hat on, making a $1 million bet on a new location that you've got to have a crew there that you really support, and then the management time to handle it and do it. It's a lot more time intensive than it is just doing an acquisition. On the other hand, there's good value creation. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it is a balancing act, and I think as our team grows, we have more people to spread that load around, and we'll be able to do more de novos. So it'll be a growing part of what we do over time.
Yeah, and I think the real estate component is so important in de novos because that's arguably like one of the first most important decisions you make is making sure like you're in a good area, making sure the competition analysis or the competition ratio is favorable. You want to have good, we like to call it drive through or drive to, not drive through type, retail settings. How do you guys do your site selection for de novo locations?
Yeah, so look, sometimes we will commission third-party demographic studies to help us find site selection. More often than not, it's markets that we know, that the foundational crew has lived in that area. We're not going to a new market we don't know anything about. Someone there knows and says, hey, this is my neighborhood. This is a neighborhood where there's going to be new growth. This is where I think there's a fit. So certainly at this scale, we're able to rely on boots on the ground expertise. And then sometimes we supplement it with some demographic analysis and traffic analysis, things of that nature. You're right. If you get the real estate wrong, the location wrong, it's really hard. And so everything's easier when you're in an area with good growth. It makes everything easier. And with flat or no growth, then you're having to work even harder to make things happen.
Yeah. And do you guys mostly focus on retail classified locations? What you would classify as retail?
Not necessarily. In the veterinary space, people tend to bring their pets somewhere close to their house, so it needs to be residential. A lot of retail happens to be around residents, and it has traffic anyway. But it doesn't have to be a retail center or a strip center. We have plenty of freestanding buildings. It needs to be accessible, ideally visible, and close to where groups of people live.
Yeah. Yeah. And I 100% agree. I mean, that's what we're coaching all the time is, yeah, it doesn't necessarily, to be classified as retail, it doesn't necessarily have to be like in that strip center with a bunch of neighbor tenants. I mean, sometimes that works out great because you can capitalize on their traffic. Sometimes you can capitalize on a big anchor tenant like a grocery store. But even a single standing building, if it's got good visibility, right? Like people are driving by, they're driving on their way to their normal commute, whatever they do, like to and from home every single day, then that can serve the purpose right there. Because we like to explain it like, rent is oftentimes a factor of your marketing, but you just don't realize it. And so like people who fail to get a good location, they might think to themselves, oh, I'll just have this, like this rent is super cheap or this building is super cheap. We'll save a bunch of money. We'll go back here, but it's recessed a little bit. And so then what happens is you maximize your referrals and you get to a certain point, and then it's like, how are you going to grow from there? Well, now you got to start using digital advertising because that's, the next step. And the problem with digital advertising, even though I think it's great, and I'm sure you guys are doing that as well, but it's a bidding platform, right? So it's only going to get more and more expensive. So if you look at rent as a factor of your marketing, then it's like, okay, how much more rent can we afford to pay if that's going to mean that we're going to save this much in digital marketing? Like how much does it cost us to get an average cost per customer? And $10 a square foot, it can sound like a lot when you've got a couple thousand square feet that you're dealing with. But if you look at that, how many new customers or how many new clients can that get me per month or per year, then oftentimes it gives you different optics to that situation.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. It really is. Look, there are always trade-offs. you can pivot quickly on your digital advertising, but you're locked into a space. There's a huge switching cost in real estate and space. So you really want to get something that's going to work. And there's a reason that a cheap space may be cheap, and
Yeah.
it's worth having a good space and room to grow and good visibility. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I get it, right? Like it's scary because, when you talk about increasing the rent, like sometimes you can even double your rent, right? So, I mean, one example, we worked with a guy, he was paying $3,000 a month in rent, and the next like viable location that was good with good visibility, in a retail center with lots of traffic was 10 grand. So it's like, wow, I'm gonna go from 3 grand to 10 grand a month. And that seems like crazy because you're tripling. You're more than tripling your rent. But when you consider it as a factor of your overall expenses, it's only 5 to 10% maybe. And what happened was when he tripled his rent, but he doubled his revenue. So he went from like 50 to 100 grand a month in revenue. And so it's like that 7 grand extra in rent ended up paying dividends in return. And so a lot of times you can, looking through that lens, I think can help people kind of ease their fears about paying more for, because rent is scary because it's locked in. But more often than not, if you're in the right location, it's going to be worth the investment.
Yeah, and sometimes those numbers that's an extra, $3,000 or $7,000 a month. When you break that down to what you need per day or per hour of extra business, those become very manageable numbers. And say, look, how much traffic or volume will I get from this? There are other ways to economize. If you're landlocked in a building, you're kind of out of luck. You can't grow without moving. You don't have to build a Taj Mahal building, though. If you have space, you can finish out part of it now and build more over time. And it's worth having a good space and good visibility and give yourself some flexibility to grow. You don't have to have the fanciest finish out initially, but invest in the quality location and the infrastructure.
Yeah, that's so smart. Okay, and then we talked earlier about the problems that happen when you are growing, because sometimes you just mentioned that physical constraint, like that physical barrier. And so now it's like, okay, can I expand my office? Can I expand my physical footprint here, or do I have to relocate? How do you guys tackle that problem?
Yeah, so we look at our businesses all the time and say, what are the constraints to growth? What are the things keeping a business back? Is it that they need more people, more equipment, and space? And for veterinary practices is a very common constraint. They don't have enough treatment room or exam rooms. If they have room to expand on site, that's fantastic. Usually adding a little bit of extra, a couple thousand square feet, even 1,000 square feet can add a lot of usable space to a small business. It's when they're really landlocked, there's no more parking, they can't expand the building. That becomes a problem. Do you have to move and now invest $1 million or $2 million in finishing out a new facility? Are you trapped into double rent and you can't sublease the space? Things of that nature. We'll finish this year around 60 locations, but we have 3 or 4 complete new builds going on right now, and we did 2 earlier this year, and we probably have 5 or 6 smaller expansions going on. It's an area where we see a lot of value. If we can provide our businesses and teams the room to have parking and see more clients, it's a good long-term investment. So it fits well with our business model, and it's something we're doing now. And it's always situational. You have to get in there and walk around and understand what is the limitation, what type of space you need, can you do it on site, and what would hold you back. And sometimes it does require moving. We've done some of those.
Yeah, and relocating is never fun because it's super expensive, especially when you guys have build outs like you do in the vet space.
Yeah, look, it is not fun, and it can be expensive. Finishing out a shell or building a new building is a big outlay. So, where possible, you want to do small remodels. And look, it's a real advantage when we acquire a business and know, hey, they have room to grow where they are or in their current space. There's some things you almost never have too much of. Parking in rooms in veterinary medicine, treatment room and exam rooms.
Okay, well, what are some like book recommendations or podcast recommendations that you have that you think would be beneficial for people listening in?
Well, I think one of my absolute favorite podcasts is How I Built This. I find them inspirational. They're entertaining. They're really well done. I enjoy it. Every time I listen to it, I'm motivated and light a little fire in me. And feel a little bit of camaraderie from the trials and tribulations of other people going through things. On a
Yeah.
totally non-business tangent, I think one of the better podcasts I've listened to in a long time is the History of Rome podcast. If you like ancient history, it was long, a lot of history there, but 1,000 years of history in 120 episodes or something, but very well done and entertaining and kind of light given the subject matter.
That's
I
cool.
consume information fairly voraciously, and I have to say I do a lot more of podcasts and things of that these days than I do books. It's easier to do on a plane and
Do you
less
speed up
weight
the Do you speed up the listening speed like 1.5 or
I
2?
don't. I know a lot of people do. My wife does. I do not like to speed them up. So
I just listened to The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. It's a 60-hour audiobook all about Nazi Germany, and I had to speed that one up. I mean, it was just long. It was very interesting, but some parts of it were just like, they took forever. I'm glad it was such a cool book, and it was so insightful the way I did it, but I don't think I could have survived it at one speed.
it is a long one. Yep, no doubt.
Have you listened to that one?
I have not. I'll have to put it on the list.
Okay. So, and then for anybody who wants to learn more about what you guys are doing at Innovative Pet Care or reach out or get in touch, I mean, what's a good resource for them to reach out to?
Yeah, innovativepetcare.com is our website, or reach out to Mark Ziller on LinkedIn. Always happy to make connections and share information. Look, throughout my career, I've benefited from time and advice and generosity of others, and always happy to connect and chat with people if I can ever pay it forward.
Yeah, well, you've been very generous with your time on our podcast, and definitely appreciate that.
Well, my pleasure. Nice to speak to you, and I'll have to subscribe. This will be on my podcast list now.